worst part wasn't the creature itself. It wasn't even watching my dog die protecting me. The worst part was running away while Rexy fought for both our lives, leaving her there to face that thing alone. That moment haunts me more than any nightmare could. It's hard for me to even think about it. It started one morning in April when I decided to go deeper into the woods than I'd ever gone before. If I'd known what was waiting out there, I would have stayed home. I would have dealt with another miserable weekend in my empty apartment, listening to the neighbors argue through thin walls and trying not to think about how quiet everything had become since David died. 2 years. That's how long it had been since the heart attack took him. 2 years of coming home to silence, of eating dinner alone, of waking up to an empty bed. The only thing that kept me sane was Rexy, my German shepherd. She was 3 when David passed, and she seemed to understand that our little family had shrunk. She stayed closer to me after that, following me from room to room like she was afraid I might disappear too. Work had become unbearable. The insurance company where I processed claims felt like a prison, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead while I sat in a gray cubicle rejecting people's hopes for coverage. I hated every minute of it, but the bills didn't care about my feelings. The mortgage, the utilities, the vet bills, the groceries for one person and one dog. Everything cost money, and money meant staying at that job no matter how much it drained me. The only escape was the weekends in the forest. David and I used to go camping together, but after he died, it became something I did with Rexy. She loved the outdoors almost as much as he had. Watching her run through the trees, splashing in streams, chasing squirrels she'd never catch, it reminded me that there was still joy in the world. Small moments of it anyway. That particular week in April had been especially brutal. My supervisor had assigned me 3 times my normal workload. The apartment's heating system had broken down, and I'd gotten a call from David's doctor's office about some paperwork they needed. Just hearing his name spoken by a stranger over the phone had sent me into a crying fit that lasted an hour. By Friday evening, I was done, completely done. I couldn't stand the thought of spending another weekend in that apartment, surrounded by his things that I couldn't bring myself to pack away. I needed to get far from everything, somewhere I couldn't hear traffic or sirens or neighbors or anything that reminded me of the life I was barely managing to live. So I decided to go deeper, much deeper than our usual spots. Instead of the familiar trails near the parking areas, I wanted to find a place where civilization felt like a distant memory. I packed extra supplies, told Rexy we were going on an adventure, and loaded up my old Honda. The drive took longer than usual. I passed the turnoffs for our regular camping spots and kept going, following Forest Service roads that got narrower and bumpier with each mile. Rexy sat in the passenger seat with her head out the window, ears flapping in the wind, tongue hanging out in pure happiness. At least one of us was enjoying this. After 2 hours of driving, I found what I was looking for. A barely there trail led off from a dirt road winding deeper into the forest. I parked at what looked like an old logging site, grabbed our gear, and started hiking. Rexy bounded ahead, then circled back to me, then bounded ahead again, her tail wagging constantly. We hiked for about 3 hours. The trail faded to nothing after the first hour, but I kept following game paths and clearings, always heading away from where we'd come. The trees grew thicker and older the further we went. These were massive pines and firs that had probably been standing for centuries, their canopy so dense that the forest floor stayed in perpetual twilight, even in the middle of the day. Eventually, we found the perfect spot, a small clearing next to a stream surrounded by enormous trees. The water was crystal clear and cold, running over smooth rocks worn down by decades of flow. Rexy immediately ran to the stream and started drinking, then splashing around like a puppy. I set up camp in the center of the clearing, far enough from the trees that falling branches wouldn't be a problem, close enough to the stream that I could hear the water babbling. It was peaceful in a way that felt almost sacred. No car sounds, no airplane engines, no human voices except my own talking to Rexy. Just the wind in the trees, the water over rocks, and the occasional bird call. The silence was exactly what I'd been looking for. After months of noise and stress and reminders of everything I'd lost, this felt like stepping into a different world. A world where I could just exist without having to perform or pretend or push through another day. After setting up the tent, I sat on a fallen log and just breathed. Really breathed, maybe for the first time in weeks. Rexy came over with a stick in her mouth, dropping it at my feet and giving me those expectant brown eyes that always made me smile. I threw the stick across the clearing and she bounded after it, bringing it back for another round. We played fetch for almost an hour, just me and my dog, throwing sticks and watching her leap through the tall grass like she was flying. She was so happy, so alive, so completely in the moment in the way that only dogs can be. For that hour, I forgot about everything else. The empty apartment, the terrible job, the loneliness that followed me everywhere. There was just this moment, this game, this simple joy. As evening approached, I started a small fire and cooked a simple dinner. Canned soup for me, dry food with some leftover chicken for Rexy. She ate with her usual enthusiasm, then came to sit beside me while I finished my meal. The sun was setting through the trees, casting long shadows across our little clearing. That's when things started to feel different. As darkness crept in, Rexy's behavior changed. She'd been relaxed and playful all afternoon, but now she kept lifting her head, ears perked, staring off into the forest, not in any particular direction, just listening, watching. Alert in a way that made me start paying attention too. At first, I figured it was just normal forest sounds, owls, maybe a raccoon or deer moving through the underbrush. The forest was settling into its nighttime rhythm, and I expected the usual symphony of cricket chirps and rustling leaves. But something felt off, too quiet in some ways, too loud in others. Then I heard it, a sharp crack from somewhere deep in the trees, like someone hitting two pieces of wood together but with tremendous force. Knock, knock, knock. 3 distinct sounds, each one echoing through the forest before fading to silence. Rexy's ears shot up, standing straight as arrows, her body going rigid with attention. I listened for several minutes, straining to hear anything else. The normal forest sounds seemed muted now, as if every creature out there was holding its breath. Probably just a woodpecker, I told myself, a really big woodpecker working on some dead tree. Nothing to worry about. But even as I thought it, I knew it didn't sound right. Woodpeckers had a different rhythm, a more natural cadence. This was deliberate, measured, almost purposeful. The silence stretched on until I started to relax again. Maybe it really had been nothing, just my imagination running wild in an unfamiliar place. But then the sounds came again, this time from a completely different direction. Knock, knock, pause, knock, 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 knock. Faster, more rhythmic, almost like Morse code, or like someone tapping out a complex message on invisible drums scattered throughout the forest. Rexy got to her feet, her body language completely transformed from the relaxed dog who'd been playing fetch just hours earlier. She didn't growl or bark, but every line of her body was focused on those sounds. Her tail was low, not tucked, but wary. Her muscles were coiled like springs. I'd never seen her react like this to normal forest noises, not even when we'd encountered bears or mountain lions on previous trips. The knocking continued throughout the evening, and as it did, I began to notice patterns that made my skin crawl. It wasn't random. The sounds would start in one location, then move systematically to another, as if whatever was making them was walking a perimeter around our camp. Sometimes they came in groups of 3, sometimes 5, sometimes 7, always odd numbers, always with that same deliberate spacing. Between the knocking sessions, I started hearing other things, branches breaking in the distance, but not the random snaps you'd expect from wind or settling trees. These breaks came in sequences, like something large was deliberately stepping on deadfall. The breaks would start far away, get closer, then fade back into the distance, following no pattern I could understand. Then there were the smells. Around 10 o'clock, a musky odor drifted through our campsite. Not the clean scent of deer or the sharp tang of a fox, but something rank and animal that I couldn't identify. It reminded me of the monkey house at a zoo, but stronger, wilder, with an underlying note of something predatory. Rexy's nostrils flared when the smell hit, and she took several steps backward, closer to our tent. The most unnerving thing was how the normal forest sounds began to disappear. Early in the evening, I'd heard the usual chorus of night creatures. Owls calling, small animals rustling through the underbrush, the distant howl of coyotes. But as the knocking sounds continued, the forest grew quieter and quieter until the only sounds were the knocking, the deliberate branch breaks, and the constant babble of the stream. It was like every other living thing in the forest knew something was out there, something that didn't belong, and they were all hiding until it passed. Around 11, the knocking pattern changed again. Instead of the measured, almost communicative sounds from before, they became rapid-fire bursts. Many, many knocks, then silence. Then another burst from a different direction, then another. It sounded agitated, urgent, like whatever was making the sounds was getting worked up about something. That's when I noticed movement in my peripheral vision, just shadows shifting between the trees, but too large and too purposeful to be natural sway. I turned to look directly, but whatever it was stayed just outside the range of our firelight. Still, I could feel eyes on me. That unmistakable sensation of being watched by something intelligent, something that was studying me with far more interest than any normal forest animal would show. Rexy felt it too. She'd positioned herself between me and the forest, standing guard in a way she'd never done before. Her breathing was shallow and controlled, like she was trying not to make any unnecessary noise. Every few minutes, she'd turn her head slightly, tracking something I couldn't see moving through the darkness beyond our camp. The fire started to die down, and I debated whether to add more wood. Part of me wanted the light, the illusion of safety that the flames provided. But another part worried that the fire was making us too visible, drawing unwanted attention to our location. In the end, I let it burn down to coals, hoping we'd be less obvious in the darkness. That was a mistake. As soon as the flames died, the knocking sounds moved closer, much closer. I could hear them coming from just outside the ring of trees that surrounded our clearing, maybe 50 yards away. The pattern was different now too. Not the measured communication sounds from earlier, but something that sounded almost like applause. Slow, deliberate clapping that went on for minutes at a time. Between the clapping sounds, I heard something else that made my blood run cold. Footsteps, not the light patter of deer hooves or the shuffling gait of a bear, but the heavy, deliberate footfalls of something walking upright. Something big enough that I could feel the vibrations through the ground when it stepped near the stream. The footsteps would approach our camp, circle partway around, then retreat into the forest. Each time they came a little closer, testing boundaries, seeing how near they could get before we reacted. But we didn't react. I was too scared to move, and Rexy seemed to understand that staying still and quiet was our best defense. Around midnight, the sound stopped completely. The sudden silence was somehow more terrifying than the noises had been. At least when I could hear whatever was out there, I had some idea of where it was. Now it could be anywhere, moving silently through the darkness, getting closer without any warning. Rexy remained motionless, but I could see her eyes reflecting the dying firelight as she scanned the tree line. Her ears swiveled constantly, tracking sounds too faint for me to hear. Occasionally, she'd tense even more, focusing on some specific spot in the darkness, but she never barked or growled. It was like she knew that making noise would bring unwanted attention. The waiting was agony. Minutes stretched into hours as we sat in that clearing, surrounded by an unnatural silence that felt pregnant with menace. I found myself holding my breath, straining to hear the slightest sound that might give away the location of whatever was stalking us. Then, around 2 a.m, I heard something that nearly made me scream. A sound I can only describe as a low, rumbling vocalization. Not quite a growl, not quite speech, but something in between. It came from directly behind our tent, maybe 20 feet away, and it went on for several seconds before fading to nothing. Rexy's reaction was immediate and terrifying. She spun toward the sound, her hackles rising, her lips pulling back to show her teeth. But she still didn't make a sound. Whatever was out there was close enough that any noise from us might trigger an attack. The vocalization came again, this time from a different location, then again and again, always moving, always just outside our sight. It was like the thing was testing us, seeing how we'd react to its presence. The sounds weren't quite threatening, more like someone calling out in a language I didn't understand. But there was intelligence in those calls, a deliberate quality that made it clear we were dealing with something that could think, that could plan, that was making conscious decisions about how to approach us. As dawn finally began to break, the sounds gradually faded away. The mysterious caller moved deeper into the forest, its vocalizations growing fainter and more distant until they disappeared entirely. Only then did Rexy finally relax slightly, though she remained alert and watchful. I hadn't slept at all. Every muscle in my body ached from hours of tension, and my nerves were shot from the constant fear. But as the first rays of sunlight filtered through the canopy, I felt a surge of relief. We'd made it through the night. Whatever had been stalking us was gone, or so I thought. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. Woodpeckers or branches hitting each other in the wind, or maybe another camper somewhere out there doing campfire maintenance. But the more I listened, the more deliberate it sounded, like communication, like something out there was signaling to something else. By the time I was ready for bed, my nerves were on edge. The peaceful feeling from earlier had completely evaporated. I called Rexy to come into the tent with me, something I usually only did when it was really cold, but she wouldn't come. She just sat outside the tent, still as a statue, staring into the forest. I called her name again, used my most commanding voice, even offered her a treat. Nothing. She stayed exactly where she was, like she was on guard duty. I unzipped the tent flap and stuck my head out. "Rexy, come here, girl. Come on." She turned to look at me for just a second, then immediately went back to staring at the trees. That's when I noticed she was trembling slightly. Not from cold, it wasn't that chilly, but from tension, from fear. The knocking sounds had stopped for a while, but now they started up again. This time they seemed closer, more urgent, and they were definitely moving. Starting from one direction, then shifting to another, like whatever was making them was circling our camp. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. Something was out there. Something that had my fearless German shepherd scared enough to disobey direct commands. I crawled out of the tent and sat beside her. "What is it, girl? What do you hear?" She leaned against me but didn't take her eyes off the forest. We sat there together for what felt like hours, listening to those strange knocking sounds move around us in the darkness. Sometimes they seemed far away, echoing through the trees. Sometimes they were close enough that I expected to see something emerge from the shadows at any moment. Eventually, the sounds began to fade, moving away, growing more distant, until finally they stopped altogether. Only then did Rexy relax slightly, though she still wouldn't come into the tent. She lay down right outside the entrance, nose pointed toward where the sounds had been coming from. I managed to sleep, though not well. Every little noise woke me up. Branches creaking, leaves rustling, the stream babbling over rocks. Each time I'd check to see if Rexy was still there, and she always was, alert and watchful even when resting. Morning came gray and misty, the sun struggling to penetrate the thick canopy above us. I felt groggy and on edge, like I'd spent the night half awake. Rexy seemed more relaxed, but still different from her usual morning enthusiasm. She stayed close to me as I started the camp stove and made coffee. The normalcy of making breakfast helped calm my nerves. Coffee and instant oatmeal, nothing fancy, but the familiar routine was comforting. I shared some of my oatmeal with Rexy, who ate it gratefully but kept glancing toward the trees. After eating, I decided to take a walk around the clearing, just to stretch my legs and shake off the weird feelings from the night before. In the daylight, the forest seemed peaceful again. Birds were singing, squirrels chattered in the branches, everything looked perfectly normal. Rexy followed me as I wandered around the edge of our campsite, but she kept veering toward the area where those knocking sounds had seemed to come from. Finally, she trotted over to a spot about 50 yards from our tent and stopped. She started sniffing the ground intensely, then backing away, then approaching again. Her hackles were raised and she was making low, whining sounds. Curious, I walked over to see what had caught her attention. At first, I didn't notice anything unusual, just forest floor covered with fallen leaves and pine needles. But then Rexy pawed at something, brushing away some of the debris. My blood turned to ice. There in the soft earth was a footprint. But not just any footprint. This thing was enormous, at least 18 inches long and 7 inches wide. It looked vaguely human in shape, with 5 distinct toe impressions, but it was 3 times the size of my own boot. The depth of the impression suggested whatever made it was incredibly heavy. I stared at it for a long moment, my brain struggling to process what I was seeing. It had to be some kind of mistake. Maybe an old bear print that had been distorted by rain and time. But the shape was wrong for a bear. Too human-like. Rexy was getting more agitated, sniffing and whining and pawing at the ground. That's when I noticed there wasn't just one print. There were several, forming a rough trail leading away from our camp and deeper into the forest. Each one was massive, the stride between them longer than anything human could manage. My hands started shaking as the implications sank in. Something huge had been walking around our campsite during the night. Something that stood upright and moved on 2 legs but was far larger than any person. Those knocking sounds hadn't been woodpeckers or branches. They'd been made by whatever creature had left these prints, and it had been circling us, watching us, while we slept. I looked down at Rexy, who was now backing away from the prints, her body language screaming danger. She'd known. Somehow she'd sensed what was out there and had tried to protect me. Fear hit me like a physical blow. My heart started racing, my breathing became shallow, and every instinct I had screamed at me to run. But I forced myself to think logically. It was daylight now. Whatever had been here was gone. I just needed to pack up quickly and get back to the car. I tried to keep my voice calm as I called to Rexy. "Come on, girl, time to go home." She didn't need any encouragement. She was already heading back toward camp, staying close to my side. I could feel the tension radiating from her body, the same fear that was making my stomach churn. Breaking camp became an exercise in controlled panic. I told myself to stay calm, to pack methodically, but my hands were shaking too badly to fold things properly. I stuffed everything into my backpack without bothering to organize it, just wanting to get out of there as quickly as possible. Rexy had positioned herself between me and the forest, constantly scanning the tree line. Her behavior was making my fear worse. If she was this scared, there was definitely something to be afraid of. I was rolling up my sleeping bag when she started growling, low and deep, the kind of growl she only made when she sensed real danger. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. "What is it, Rexy?" She was staring into the forest, her body rigid, lips pulled back to show her teeth. The growling got louder, more intense. I followed her gaze, but couldn't see anything except trees and shadows. But I could hear something, branches breaking, heavy footsteps moving through the underbrush, coming closer. The footsteps were getting louder, more distinct, not the quick, light steps of a deer or the shuffling gait of a bear. These were deliberate, purposeful, the sound of something large moving with intelligence and intent. Rexy's growls turned into sharp barks, aggressive, warning barks that echoed through the forest. She'd planted herself in front of me, every muscle tensed, ready to fight whatever was coming. I abandoned any pretense of organized packing. I grabbed my backpack, not caring that half my gear was still scattered around the campsite. All that mattered was getting out of there before whatever was making those sounds reached us. The footsteps were getting closer, much closer. I could hear branches snapping, leaves rustling, the sound of something massive pushing through the forest. And it was moving fast, too fast for me to outrun. Rexy's barking became frantic, desperate. She was backing up toward me, but still facing the forest, her whole body vibrating with tension and fear. That's when I saw it. The trees at the edge of our clearing suddenly exploded with movement as something huge burst through them. At first, my brain couldn't process what I was seeing. It was like a person, but wrong. Impossibly tall and broad, covered in dark hair or fur, moving with a fluid grace that seemed impossible for something so large. It had to be 8 feet tall, maybe more. Its shoulders were massive, its arms hung down almost to its knees, and its face was a nightmare mixture of human and animal features. Small, intelligent eyes glared out from under a heavy brow ridge. Its mouth was open, showing yellowed teeth, and it was making a sound that was part roar, part scream. Time seemed to slow down. I could see every detail with horrible clarity. The way its muscles rippled under the coarse hair covering its body, the intelligence in those dark eyes, the pure predatory focus as it looked at me. This wasn't some mindless animal. This thing was thinking, planning, hunting. I screamed and started backing away, but my feet tangled in the tense guy lines, and I went down hard, landing on my back with the wind knocked out of me. The creature roared again and started charging directly at me, covering the distance between us with terrifying speed. I was going to die. That was my only thought as I watched 8 feet of nightmare racing toward me. I was going to die, and no one would ever know what happened to me. But then Rexy moved. Without any command from me, without hesitation, my loyal dog launched herself at the creature. She cleared 20 feet in a single bound, aiming for its throat. The thing's eyes went wide with surprise as 60 pounds of German Shepherd slammed into it. Rexy locked her jaws onto the creature's neck, her momentum carrying both of them backward. The thing stumbled, roaring in pain and rage, trying to get its massive hands around my dog to pull her off. I managed to get my hands on a thick branch that had fallen from one of the big trees. It was heavy, solid, maybe 3 feet long. I struggled to my feet, raising it like a club, but my body wouldn't cooperate. The thing was so huge, so terrifying, that every instinct I had was screaming at me to run. The creature managed to get a grip on Rexy and yanked her away from its throat, holding her at arm's length. She was snarling and snapping, trying to get at it again, her legs scrambling in the air. With casual, brutal strength, it hurled her toward the nearest tree. The sound when she hit was horrible, a wet crack that seemed to echo through the forest. Rexy fell to the ground and didn't move for several seconds. When she finally struggled to her feet, I could see she was hurt badly. One of her legs wasn't working right, and there was blood on her muzzle. The creature turned its attention back to me. Its neck was bleeding where Rexy had bitten it, and there was pure rage in its eyes. It took a step toward me, then another, those massive hands reaching out. I wanted to help Rexy. Every fiber of my being was screaming at me to fight, to protect my dog like she'd protected me. But I couldn't move. The terror had frozen me completely. All I could do was stand there, branch in hand, watching death approach. But Rexy wasn't done. Despite her injuries, despite being thrown into a tree like a rag doll, she gathered herself and charged again. This time she was slower, more unsteady, but her determination was absolute. She lashed onto the creature's leg, biting down with everything she had. The thing roared and tried to shake her off, but Rexy held on. She was buying me time, giving me a chance to escape, and she knew it. I could see it in her eyes when she looked at me for just a moment, a look that said run, that said go, that said I love you, but you have to leave me. My body finally responded, not to my commands, but to some deeper survival instinct. I turned and ran, leaving my dog behind to face that monster alone. I ran like I'd never run before. Branches tore at my clothes and face. Roots tried to trip me, but I kept going. Behind me, I could hear the sounds of the fight continuing. Rexy's barks and snarls mixing with the creature's roars of pain and anger. I ran until my lungs were on fire, until my legs felt like they might collapse, until the sounds of battle faded behind me. But I kept going, driven by pure terror and the knowledge that if I stopped, if I let that thing catch me, then Rexy's sacrifice would be for nothing. The forest seemed to go on forever. Every direction looked the same. Endless trees, thick underbrush, shadows that could hide anything. I had no idea which way led back to the car. I was lost, exhausted, and alone. But I kept running, and as I ran, I began to hear something that made my blood freeze. Silence. The sounds of fighting had stopped. There were no more barks, no more snarls, no more roars. Then, drifting through the trees from far behind me, came a sound that will haunt me for the rest of my life. A long, agonized whimper, the sound of a dog in terrible pain, the sound of my loyal, brave Rexy dying alone while I ran away to save myself. The whimper faded to nothing, and the forest fell completely silent. I stumbled and fell to my knees, sobbing uncontrollably. She was gone. My last connection to the life I'd shared with David, the only family I had left, was gone, and I'd abandoned her. I'd run away and left her to die fighting something that should have been my battle too. The guilt was worse than the fear. I should have stayed. I should have fought beside her. I should have died with her rather than running away like a coward. What kind of person abandons their dog? What kind of person lets their best friend die alone? But even as I hated myself for running, I knew I couldn't stop. The creature was still out there somewhere. It might be tracking me, following my scent, or the sound of my crashing through the forest. If I wanted Rexy's sacrifice to mean something, I had to survive. I looked at the sun, trying to get my bearings. It was past noon now, the light slanting through the trees from the west. If I kept the sun to my right, I should eventually hit the road where I'd left my car. Assuming I could find my way back through miles of identical-looking forest, I started walking, every step taking me further from where I'd left my dog to die. The guilt felt like a physical weight, making each movement harder than the last. But I kept going, one foot in front of the other, because stopping meant giving up completely. Hours passed. The forest seemed endless, a maze of trees and rocks and streams that all looked the same. My water ran out. My feet were blistered and bleeding in my hiking boots. Thorns had torn my clothes to shreds, and cuts covered my arms and face. But worse than any physical pain was the silence. No birds singing, no squirrels chattering, no sound of life at all. Just my own footsteps and labored breathing. Even the forest seemed to know what had happened back there. Even the trees were mourning Rexy. As the sun began to set, I finally saw something that wasn't trees. A wooden fence, old and weathered, but definitely man-made. I followed it until I reached a dirt road, and then followed that until I saw lights in the distance. The village was small, just a handful of houses and a general store. I must have looked like something out of a horror movie. Torn clothes, scratched and bleeding, wild-eyed with trauma. The first person who saw me, an elderly woman sweeping her porch, took one look and immediately ushered me inside. She gave me water, cleaned my wounds, wrapped me in a blanket. Other villagers came by to check on me, offering food and help and asking gentle questions about what had happened. They were kind people, generous with their care for a stranger who'd obviously been through something terrible. But I couldn't tell them. How could I explain that I'd encountered something that wasn't supposed to exist? How could I describe watching my dog die fighting a monster while I ran away? How could I admit to the cowardice that would define the rest of my life? So I said nothing. I let them assume I'd gotten lost, had an accident, been traumatized by being alone in the woods. They didn't push for details, respecting my obvious distress. Someone called the authorities to report that I'd been found. Someone else offered me a ride back to civilization. I spent the night in that village, lying awake in a stranger's spare room, staring at the ceiling and reliving those final moments over and over. The sound of branches breaking as that thing charged out of the forest. The look in Rexy's eyes when she decided to attack something 3 times her size. The wet crack when she hit the tree. The silence that followed her final whimper. I left the next morning without saying much to anyone. The kind people who'd helped me deserved better than my silence, but I had nothing to give them. No explanation that would make sense. No gratitude that could encompass what they'd done for me. The drive home was the longest journey of my life. Every mile took me further from where Rexy had died, but also closer to an empty apartment that would now be truly empty. No excited barking when I opened the door. No warm body curled up beside me on the couch. No reason to come home at all. The apartment felt like a tomb. David's things were still there, reminders of one loss. But now Rexy's things were there too. Her food bowls, her favorite toys, the blanket she slept on. Reminders of a second loss, one that was entirely my fault. I called in sick to work for the rest of the week. I couldn't face those fluorescent lights and gray cubicles, couldn't pretend to care about insurance claims and denial letters. I just sat in my empty apartment, surrounded by memories of the only 2 beings who'd ever really mattered to me. The guilt consumed me. I played those final moments over and over in my mind, imagining all the ways I could have acted differently. I could have grabbed that branch and fought beside Rexy. I could have distracted the creature somehow, given her a better chance. I could have stayed with her at the end so she didn't die alone. But I'd run instead. When my loyal, brave dog needed me most, I'd abandoned her. Days blurred together. I stopped eating regularly, stopped showering, stopped caring about anything. The phone rang sometimes, work checking on me, a few acquaintances wondering where I was. But I didn't answer. What was the point? What did any of it matter now? Sometimes I thought about going back to look for her body. She deserved a proper burial, deserved better than being left in that forest. But I couldn't face returning to that place. The thought of seeing those trees again, that clearing where everything had gone wrong, filled me with panic. And I was ashamed of my cowardice, ashamed of my failure, ashamed to face the evidence of how completely I'd let down the one creature who had always been there for me. Heroes rush toward danger to save their loved ones. Cowards run away and let them die alone. I knew which one I was. Weeks passed before I could function normally again. I went back to work because I had to, processed insurance claims because the bills still needed paying. But it was all mechanical now, going through the motions of a life that no longer held any meaning. People at work noticed the change in me. I'd never been particularly social, but now I was completely withdrawn. I did my job and nothing else, speaking only when necessary, avoiding eye contact with colleagues who might ask if I was okay. Because I wasn't okay, I would never be okay again. Every night when I came home to that silent apartment, I was reminded of what I'd lost and how I'd lost it. Every morning when I woke up alone, I remembered that it didn't have to be this way. If I'd been braver, if I'd fought harder, if I'd been the person Rexy deserved, she might still be alive. The nightmares came frequently. Sometimes I dreamed about the creature, reliving those terrifying moments when it burst from the forest. Sometimes I dreamed about Rexy, seeing her charge that monster over and over, watching her get thrown into that tree, hearing her final whimper echoing through my sleep. But the worst dreams were the ones where I didn't run, dreams where I stayed and fought beside her, where we faced that thing together. In those dreams, sometimes we won, sometimes we both died, but at least we died together, as a family should. I always woke from those dreams feeling worse than before, because they showed me what I should have done, what kind of person I should have been. They showed me the choice I'd failed to make when it mattered most. Months went by, the seasons changed, life moved on around me, but I remained frozen in that moment of terrible decision. The moment when I chose my own survival over loyalty, over love, over everything that should have mattered more than fear. I tried to tell myself that there was nothing I could have done, that the creature was too big, too strong, that I would have died uselessly if I'd stayed, that Rexy's sacrifice had given me the chance to escape, and wasting that chance would have made her death meaningless. But I didn't believe it. Deep down, I knew the truth. I'd been tested in the most fundamental way possible, and I'd failed. When my dog needed me to be brave, I'd been a coward. When she needed me to stand with her, I'd run away. The guilt became a constant companion, following me everywhere I went. It was there when I woke up each morning, reminding me that another day had started without Rexy. It was there at work, whispering that I didn't deserve the safety of that boring office job. It was there at night, ensuring that sleep brought no peace. I stopped going to the forest entirely. The sight of trees made me sick. The smell of pine needles brought back memories I couldn't handle. The outdoors, which had once been my sanctuary, my escape from the emptiness of grief, was now just another reminder of my failure. Sometimes I wondered if that creature was still out there, if it was wandering those deep woods, maybe encountering other campers, other families who might not be as lucky as I'd been. The thought that my silence might cost other people their lives was another layer of guilt to carry. But I still couldn't bring myself to report what had happened. Who would believe such a story? And how could I explain that I'd survived because my dog died protecting me while I ran away? How could I admit to that level of cowardice? So I kept silent, carrying the secret like a poison in my blood. The knowledge that somewhere in those mountains, the bones of the bravest creature I'd ever known were probably scattered among the trees, forgotten by everyone except the coward who'd abandoned her. The apartment grew quieter with each passing day. I'd thought it was silent after David died, but I'd been wrong. Rexy had filled some of that emptiness with her presence, her needs, her simple animal devotion. Now there was nothing, just me and my guilt, and my memories of a dog who'd been better than I deserved. I lasted 8 months in that apartment before I couldn't take it anymore. Every corner held reminders. The spot by the door where Rexy used to wait for me to come home, the kitchen where I'd prepared her meals, the living room where she'd curled up beside me on countless quiet evenings. I found a smaller place across town, somewhere with no history, no ghosts. But it didn't help. I carried Rexy's memory with me, and more than that, I carried the memory of my failure. Geography couldn't cure that kind of wound. Work became my only constant. The insurance company didn't care about my personal problems as long as I processed claims efficiently. So I threw myself into the job I'd once hated, working longer hours, taking on extra assignments, doing anything to keep my mind occupied during daylight hours. But the nights were still mine, and the nights were still terrible. I never got another dog. How could I? What if something happened and I failed again? What if I was faced with another choice between safety and loyalty and chose wrong again? I couldn't risk discovering that my cowardice wasn't a one-time failure, but a fundamental part of who I was. Years have passed now. The sharp edge of grief has dulled to a constant ache, manageable but never absent. I've learned to function, to get through days without breaking down, to maintain the facade of a normal life. But I know what I am. I know what I did when it mattered most. And I know that somewhere in those deep woods, the bones of my best friend lie scattered and forgotten, a monument to the moment I chose fear over love. People talk about heroism like it's something extraordinary, something that only special people possess. But I think it's simpler than that. I think heroism is just loving something more than you fear dying. It's choosing to stand when every instinct tells you to run. Rexy was a hero. She loved me more than she feared that monster. And she proved it when she charged into certain death to give me a chance to escape. I was not a hero. I was just someone who ran away when running was the easy choice, who chose survival over everything that should have mattered more. That's the story I've never told anyone, the story of how I lost everything that mattered in a forest clearing, not to a monster, but to my own cowardice. The story of how the best friend I ever had died alone because when she needed me most, I wasn't brave enough to stay. The worst part isn't the creature I saw, or the terror I felt, or even the guilt I carry. The worst part is knowing that I had a chance to be the person Rexy thought I was, and I chose to be someone else instead. I chose to be someone who runs away. And that choice defines me more than anything else I've ever done or ever will do. For more interesting stories, consider checking this out.